All right, welcome to Weather and Climate 10. Last time we talked about fossil fuels, so this time we're going to touch on global warming. Uh, I know that we talked about this in the fall when we talked about Study Island and bias, so I don't want to spend too much time rehashing some of the same information you already received. At the same time, I do want to touch upon it again a little bit because this stuff just can't be emphasized enough. This is going to be the largest issue confronting all of you in your lifetime, and so I hope it's something that all of you will have an interest in addressing at some point in time, or at least just know how this is affecting your lives. So our objectives for today are to understand global warming and climate change, and also being able to explain how humans are causing the Earth to get hotter. So we've talked about the greenhouse effect before, and humans are burning fossil fuels, releasing CO2 into the air, and CO2 is a greenhouse gas which captures and holds heat. And so the greenhouse effect is not a bad thing in and of itself. It keeps the earth warm. It's the reason why we can have liquid water. It's the reason why we can have plants and life on this planet. If all of the heat from Earth just went back out into space, then we wouldn't be able to survive. That's the reason why we can't survive on Mars, is it doesn't have enough of a greenhouse effect. Conversely, it's the reason why we can't survive on Venus, because it has too much of a greenhouse effect. Nonetheless, the greenhouse effect, the CO2 captures and holds heat, and we can see this in the Como greenhouse. This is a picture of the Como greenhouse in like February or something like that. If you look out the windows, you can see like the snow in the background. And this greenhouse is not kept warm by all kinds of heaters. It's kept warm by carbon dioxide. The way greenhouses are set up is that carbon dioxide accumulates in these spaces, and that in turn keeps the greenhouse warm enough to grow plants year-round, even if it's cold and snowy outside. So let's talk about the global warming debate quickly. To just summarize, there is no debate. You might get the false impression that there is a debate because sometimes you'll turn on CNN or you listen to NPR and they'll have two experts arguing about whether it's real or not. But when it comes to the actual science that's been produced, 97% of academic papers on the topic of climate change say it's caused by human beings, and it's going to get worse unless we do something about it. And only 3% of papers published on this topic say that it's not caused by human beings. So that's just an overwhelming majority of experts on this issue agree that climate change is caused by human beings. Unfortunately, many Americans don't believe in science, and so that's a huge problem. Lots of people want to argue about how it's not real or how it's not caused by people. And that picture is an example. And then earlier when I talked about this, I just said it's just kind of a waste of time to try and debate, established facts. Like for instance, 8 plus 3. 8 plus 3, 3 plus 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. It makes no sense to argue about whether it equals 7 or 9, especially if I have more important things to do, like buy something at the store or pay my taxes. Similarly, lots of people are arguing about whether the earth is flat, whether we should take vaccines, or even like about the coronavirus. They're like, oh, social distancing is a waste of time, or it's worthless, or not many people are actually dying of the coronavirus. So anyways, all of these unscientific arguments are just not a good use of our time, but we should know that they exist. And we should be able to address them as well, especially since sometimes we have people in our own families that really don't believe in science. So one thing that I always try to do as an educator, especially since I'm teaching middle school, high school students, is I try to respect my students, and I'm not trying to give you some simplistic, unrealistic answers to real complex problems just to make you feel good. So when it comes to the discussion about climate change, global warming, a lot of teachers and a lot of teaching materials are really focused on recycling, oh yeah, just recycle your papers and problem solved. You don't have to think about it again. Which is ridiculous. That's not going to do anything, and neither is like turning your lights off when you're not in a room at night so you can conserve electricity. I'm not saying these things aren't good. These things are good, but it's going to require a whole lot more for us to make significant changes in terms of our greenhouse gas output and our impact on the environment. Specifically, when we think about the United States produces more greenhouse gases than any other country in the world. And we have a lifestyle that is very wasteful. We drive everywhere. Everyone has their own car. When I'm driving back and forth to work on the highway, by myself, I should add, I notice that most of the people in their cars are also by themselves. So again, something extremely wasteful that should change in order for us to make an impact on our environment. Another thing is that we use a ton of disposable stuff. We use a ton of plastic stuff. Again, that has a terrible impact on our environment. But more than that, the biggest problem that we have is that we use a ton of electricity in the United States, all around the world. We use a ton of electricity. Most of that electricity is produced by the burning of fossil fuels. And this is a multi-billion, if not a multi-trillion-dollar industry all around the world. And there are some very wealthy people who have an interest in continuing the system that we have that's poisoning our planet because they make lots of money. Here we have a graph which just shows how much carbon dioxide people emit in the United States compared to everywhere else. And this is just kind of an average. So the average American produces that much carbon dioxide compared to everyone else in the world. Places like China and India, which get a really bad reputation for producing lots of carbon dioxide, they're dwarfed by the amount of carbon dioxide people produce in the United States. In the United States, we produce double of China, or India. It looks like we're close to triple, quadruple. It's a lot. We produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So if we want to make some changes, we're going to have to change our lives dramatically. We can see some of these changes happening now because we're all on lockdown from the coronavirus. Hopefully, it won't have to be that extreme, but maybe that's what we're going to have to do. So another thing that I mentioned in our previous slide is that most of the carbon dioxide pollution, CO2 pollution on Earth comes from just a few companies. Here they've got like 5 companies, 5 oil companies have been responsible for 12.5% of all CO2 pollution since 1854. It's a tremendous amount of pollution. These companies also have not only a tremendous amount of wealth, but also a tremendous amount of power. So in order to really confront them, it's going to require a very large effort by lots of people for a very long time. This graph down below just kind of repeats the information that I mentioned before, and it's just saying that the United States is one of the biggest CO2 producers in the world. So let's go ahead and let's just pause for a moment and ask the question, why is global warming bad? Don't you think that Minnesota winters are too cold right now? The weather is freezing outside. They're talking about snow possibly happening sometime this week. So wouldn't global warming be a better thing? Here we have our illustrious president, Donald Trump, talking about how the weather's cold and we could use some global warming. This is kind of like one of his favorite refrains. He's got tons of tweets where he's like, oh, the weather's cold. Where's global warming? So why is global warming bad? And what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and take a minute to respond to Donald Trump's tweets. Why is global warming bad? Go ahead and pause the video, or you can wait to the end. We'll have this posted as a discussion topic on Schoology, so go ahead and just type in your answer and explain why global warming is bad. So we have 4 different topics that we're going to talk about in terms of global warming and its effects. We're going to talk about global warming's effects on the ocean, global warming's effects on the weather, global warming's effects on food, and it's past midnight. I don't know what the fourth one is right now off the top of my head. Anyways, we're going to do the first two tonight. Okay, we're going to talk about global warming's effects on the oceans, and we're going to talk about global warming's effects on the weather. And then tomorrow we'll dip into the other two topics. So let's just go ahead and begin by talking about how global warming is going to affect the oceans. So, number one, because it's getting hotter everywhere, specifically in the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is getting hotter, specifically their oceans, and this is causing glaciers to melt in Antarctica. Not only Antarctica, but also far north in Greenland, glaciers are melting, and this is causing sea levels to rise. Rising sea levels are going to affect people who live close to the ocean, and in most countries, most of the population lives along the coastline near the ocean. It's a source of food, and so as those water levels get higher, people are going to have to move. Because there's going to be tremendous flooding. This is a map of the United States, and they're talking about flooding by the end of the century. So these areas that you can see in the blue are going to be areas where people are leaving. The areas that are marked in red are going to be the areas that they predict that they're going to move to. So these people are essentially going to be climate refugees, and they're predicting by 2100 that there will be 13 million climate refugees in the United States. So in addition to rising sea levels, global warming is causing oceans to get hotter, and hotter oceans is causing a phenomenon known as coral bleaching. And so there's actually two reasons why coral bleaching is happening. One is because the ocean water is getting hotter, and two, it's from the acidity of the oceans increasing. And I think I mentioned this in one of my previous presentations, but basically what happens is we pump more and more carbon dioxide into the air. It mixes with the rainwater to create a very mild acid called carbonic acid. And now this mild acid doesn't seem too severe, but when it accumulates all over the world and ends up in the oceans become a little bit more acidic, and just a slight change in ocean acidity will cause coral to die, in addition to that heat. And then the change in ocean acidity will also affect all kinds of animals that have shells in the ocean. And most importantly are these tiny microscopic animals that live in the ocean. They form the basis of a lot of food chains. They have shells formed from calcium carbonate, which will not survive ocean acidity. Nonetheless, coral bleaching, terrible thing, wiping out ecosystems that people depend on for food. Here's a picture of a coral reef that's alive and vibrant, and in the next picture we can see a coral reef that has suffered from coral bleaching. And so that basically causes the algae which live inside the coral to go away, and those algae form the basis of the food chain for the whole coral reef, so everything in that coral reef goes away. Warmer oceans also cause changes in the weather, and we'll talk more about that in our next slide. Increased and more severe hurricanes. Warmer oceans also disrupt ecosystems, so there's a sort of chain of life like in the coral reefs, which relies on certain temperatures and certain pH in the ocean, a certain type of acidity or lack of acidity in the ocean. And so when that changes, those systems get disrupted, and that can in turn cause food shortages. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about how global warming impacts weather. So because of global warming, there's going to be more extreme weather, and we're already seeing this now. So this is a little map about, this is about 2017 climate disasters that happened all over the U.S. You can see Minnesota made it into the news here with a hailstorm during June. I don't even remember as far back as 2017. Like I said, it's past midnight. I don't remember much of anything. I don't remember what I did today. Anyways, climate change is going to create more extreme weather. It's going to disrupt the jet stream. Right now we are experiencing very cold weather because the polar vortex is right over top of us again. In addition to that, we're going to see more hurricanes. We won't see more hurricanes because we're in Minnesota, but coastal regions will see more hurricanes that are more frequent, more severe, and last longer. Next, we're going to experience more heat waves, which is something we can look forward to this summer. There's going to be more droughts, which is something that may happen this summer as well. There'll be more flooding, as I mentioned, mostly along coastal areas, but also in inland areas. The Red River Valley in Minnesota is an area that floods every year, and those floods are going to happen more frequently, and they're going to be more severe. And this is an image from a flood. This is from a storm surge and a hurricane. So basically, when you have hurricanes, sea level rises and you get lots of waves that pound in, and they are really powerful. They can flood an area. They can just overwhelm a parking lot full of cars like you see here in this image. One more thing that's going to happen with the weather is that we are going to have increased cold weather, and that's because the jet stream is going to be disrupted, and we're going to get more of that polar vortex hanging out over places like Minnesota and the United States. That's my last slide. I think I have 2 other slides that are empty on this presentation, but that's my last slide for tonight. If you have any questions, as usual, just hit me up at sjkwok@sejongacademy.org. You can also visit me during office hours every day, 9:30 to 10:30, and don't forget you can also hit up Mr. OHOH1 at sejongacademy.org. Thank you and have a great day. Peace.